Welcome to Khealos' Gaming Table. I'm Khealos, and on this channel I talk about tabletop RPGs, miniature wargaming, and I've obviously branched out into more geeky stuff. I'm talking about franchises and other generic, sometimes not so generic, sci-fi and fantasy stuff, mostly because I'm stuck in Orlando. I need to get out, and it's fun to walk and talk about this kind of stuff. I'm hoping to actually have my next actual scripted video up by the weekend. It all depends upon whether or not I get called into the office or am on call and have to work. We'll see. Alright, so a while back on my writer Twitter page, probably my most prolific tweet that ever went out was I posted my list. Effectively, the idea is when somebody asks you or mentions a character, what is your gut reaction? Who is the first actor or actress that you think of for that particular role? An example, for me, when somebody says James Bond, 007, Roger Moore is the actor that comes to mind for me. He is what I consider my James Bond. Reasons for this are I lived in England in the early 80s, and Roger Moore at the time was James Bond. And I was a young boy, and I watched a lot of videos that we recorded. And I watched the three that really stand out for me were The Spy Who Loved Me, For Your Eyes Only, and Moonraker. And yes, I understand Moonraker was a blatant cash grab trying to cash in on Star Wars. Despite its flaws, despite the story, despite everything about it, it is still one of my favorite James Bond movies. Get over it. Now, just because Roger Moore is the first person that I think of when it comes to James Bond, he's not my favorite James Bond. I still think at this point Daniel Craig is my favorite Bond because I really do like the grittiness, the realistic, brutal approach that was taken in a lot of his movies. I thought they updated him for the modern era rather well. But, to be fair, I do have found all of the Bonds and, something redeemable in all the movies. I don't think there's a bad James Bond actor. There's just might not be some great James Bond movies. Some people, obviously, for them, Sean Connery is, the one and true James Bond. I didn't even see George Lazenby's On Her Majesty's Secret Service until I moved back to the States. I didn't even know that was a movie, to be honest. I'm like, who's this guy? Roger Moore, started in the 70s, moved into the 80s, one of the longest running Bond actors. I watched a lot of his movies, and, that influenced me, obviously, but, different people, depending upon their entry point or what they like, they have their specific Bond actor. I still like Timothy Dalton in the two movies that he was in. I thought they could have obviously done a bit better with Her Majesty's Secret Service, License to Kill. I didn't like the story, but I thought the action and I thought the way that it was handled was, the way the action wasn't too bad, and Brosnan did the best, or Dalton did the best that he could with the script that he was given. Pierce Brosnan, I thought, at least in the first couple of his Bond movies, was excellent. GoldenEye being, one of the best Bond movies out there. My biggest problem with him, well, not him, with his movies, is they started to rely on super weird and gimmicky stuff, the car that could turn invisible. Come on. If that was an actual technology, it wouldn't be put in an Aston Martin or whatever the supercar that they put that thing in. They would have it in just about everything from anything they're trying to conceal. Same kind of thing with Moonraker. They had, laser weapons. Come on. If those were real and did the damage that they're talking about, those would be standard issue. Not the PPKs that, 007 and the rest of the MI6 carried, at least the 00 branch. Well, hi there. And then, after Pierce Brosnan, we moved into Daniel Craig. And I remember the pissing and moaning about that one because, he wasn't brown-haired. He, didn't look like what all the previous actors did, but I thought he brought a very dark and sinister appeal to Bond. And he actually showed, some of the damage that, happens when you do the stuff that, somebody like Bond does. It takes its toll on your psyche after a certain point. Sure, he's a sociopath, but at some point, he was probably a bit more normal before all of that, but at any rate. But, there's a bunch of other franchises that have, spanned over the years with different, portrayals of the characters, Sherlock Holmes being one of them for some. Basil Rathbone, set in the Wayback Machine, way back. Basil Rathbone is, a great Sherlock Holmes, and there's been, well, I don't know, you could probably look it up, lots of different adaptations or portrayals. For me, granted, these are the more modern interpretations, but I really, when I think Sherlock Holmes, at least today, I do think about the Benedict Cumberbatch, Sherlock series. I find it to be a very interesting and fun take on the character in the modern age. How they incorporate, all of the different characters, Watson, Moriarty, the rest. At the same time, I still do like, the Robert Downey Jr. version, I like them both for different reasons. I do like the RDJ one for Downey Jr., whatever. Because it is more based in the time that Sherlock Holmes was supposed to be. And I really do like Guy Ritchie as a director. He's never boring, say what you will about the movies that he puts out. He's at least, never boring as a director, at least not in my opinion. Others on this, Robin Hood, one of the oldest, stories coming out of Great Britain, has been told on stage and small screen, big screen, going back a while. Errol Flynn being one of the first ones to portray, if not the first to portray on the big screen. But, for some people, the Kevin Costner Robin Hood is, their Robin Hood. There's, a bunch of different others. For me, Robin Hood, when I think Robin Hood, I think Michael Praed out of the British TV show, Michael Praed out of Robin of Sherwood. Let's, kick the brain in there. Sorry, guys. I had a hell of a day at work today, so I'm kind of brain fried. Another one of those shows that I watched while in England, absolutely loved it. The cast, the soundtrack, the setting. Unlike, a lot of the more traditional Robin Hood tales or, whatever, this one is definitely based more in like a bit of paganism, because you had Herne the Hunter as a man who lived in Sherwood who occasionally, got possessed by the spirit of the forest and provided Robin of Locksley with, guidance, sometimes set him on a quest, provided him important information. And there was, a lot of paganism, mysticism, things like that in there, because, even some devil worship, whether the antagonist from the very pilot, all the way to the, I think it was the Easter special, where a bunch of Satan worshippers were trying to gather up the swords of Wayland to break the shackles and, effectively summon Satan to the world. But, while yes, it did have mysticism and everything like that, at the same time, the show also dealt with problems of the, what they would have run into back in, that point in history. And, you had Sir Guy of Gisborne, you had the Sheriff of Nottingham. Later on, you had John Rhys Davies coming as the King of England, who returned and found out that his little brother had been screwing the pooch on how to handle things. But I think Showtime it might still have it, I'd have to check, but if you've never seen Robin of Sherwood, it is my favorite take on the story. I believe it is the interpretation that first introduces like a Saracen character from the Middle East, who came back during the Crusades and joins Robin Hood and his merry band of people. Very fun take on it. The soundtrack is great, very nice, and I still like to find it on YouTube and listen to it. For some, Sean Connery, Kevin Costner, excuse me, is their Robin Hood, and I won't fault them for that. I just do like to go back to Robin Hood Men in Tights, and that in fact that they actually did hire an actor that could at least speak in a British accent for that. But Robin Hood has been portrayed in numerous TV shows and movies and on the stage. Michael Praed is my Robin Hood. Superman has also been on the big screen and the small screen. Probably in surprise to no one, Christopher Reeve is my Superman. I watched a lot of Superman the motion picture, a lot of Superman 2, same kind of thing. Recorded them off of TV in England and watched the hell out of them. To a lesser extent, Superman 3. I was young. I didn't really know what a bad movie was, and it had Superman in it. And looking back as an adult, I can totally understand why it got panned, but I think the best sequence in there is when they come up with the kryptonite, and somehow Superman becomes bad Superman, and that entire battle between himself for him to come out on top. Your mileage may vary. Richard Pryor was pretty funny, and they were trying to use that as a vehicle for him, but whatever. Batman's an interesting one because most people will bring up like Alex Keaton or Val Kilmer or any one of those. For me, Michael Keaton. I don't know where Alex Keaton I think was from Family Ties. Michael Keaton, the Batman from Batman and Batman Returns, 89 and I think 91, 92. For me, my Batman would be Kevin Conroy, and he portrayed the character once in live action during the Arrowverse, Crisis on Infinite Earths or whatever it was, but he was the voice actor that actually played Batman in Batman the Animated Series. I think he played it in the Justice League, a bunch of other things, several other things, including Arkham Knights and that video game series, playing off of also with Mark Hamill as the Joker. But I found Batman the Animated Series to be very influential as well, especially when I found out that unlike a lot of traditional animation that starts with a white piece of paper and then they put lines and draw everything on there and darken it up, they actually went with dark paper and started adding lighter things because a lot of Batman usually operates at night. Everything is dark, so it's a lot easier to start with dark background and then lighten everything up with buildings or spotlights or whatever the case is. But I thought Kevin Conroy was absolutely brilliant in the role, especially since he was one of the first, if not the first, to really use a different voice. The very upbeat and very happy, cheerful, optimistic, Bruce Wayne, talking to the board directors, talking to the media, talking to whoever he was dating, Lucius Fox, whoever he's talking to, and then he switches his voice and goes to something dark and growly to differentiate, the characters, because Batman is a dichotomy. And I really enjoyed that, and it looked like, you know, some of the different actors started to take that to heart, especially Christian Bale, you know, when he took over the Batman role. For a lot of people, Christian Bale is their Batman because that was the Batman that they really saw, whether it was in the whichever Nolan movie that you want to pick. I liked his performance as Bruce Wayne in Batman, but he's not he's not Kevin Conroy. I also like Robert Pattinson in The Batman. I thought he did a really good job. I liked how he was very socially awkward because he was just now starting out his career as the Dark Knight. It kind of follows, you know, Batman Year One, as he's feeling himself getting felt out around, feeling out the situation. He's not the established crime fighter. I didn't hate Batfleck. I thought he did really well, and I would have liked to have seen, you know, like a standalone movie, but, you know, that ship sailed. I am curious to see who Gunn picks for the Caped Crusader in whatever the hell they reboot. They're calling the new DC extended cinematic universe, whatever. I am also curious to see how the actor they cast as Superman does. I watched him in the Netflix show Hollywood. I think it was called Hollywood. And, you know, he's got that square jaw. He's going to have to put on some muscle if they're going to go with more of a larger Superman, or he might just tone himself out. You know, we'll see. But I think he'll do really well as Clark Kent Superman. He definitely has that Smallville kind of look when he wants to. We'll see how he looks. You know, he's fighting whoever the villain for that movie is, but, you know, that's going to be a while away. But let's see, who else? Those were some of the big ones that I had. Doctor Who. And this one could be very divisive. Oh, wow, it's kind of rainy. Oh, yay. First time. I've been in Orlando for a week and a half. This is the first time I felt water falling from the sky. It's kind of sprinkling. So we might get to watch Khealos get wet. Yep, we're going to watch Khealos get wet. But I'm committed at this point. It's not like I'm going to run back. Doctor Who. For me, my doctor is the fifth Doctor, Peter Davidson. Not Pete Davidson of Saturday Night Live fame, Peter Davidson. Same kind of thing. I was in England. Tom Baker was coming off his run, his very long and prolific run as the fourth Doctor. And then he regenerated into Peter Davidson, and we watched, you know, his entire run. You know, and up to the point that, you know, he regenerated into Colin Baker. And I don't remember much about his run. I just remember he had, I want to say, some cricket clothing, and got some, and, you know, it's just when I think of Doctor Who, you know, I'm going old school. You know, not quite as old school as like Patrick Troughton or something like, or William Hartnell. Whoever the first Doctor was, but definitely, definitely going back to the 80s for my reference of Doctor Who. I watched the first season of the redone Doctor Who, and I really liked it. The problem being, he only lasted a season, and then they switched it, and then I just lost interest after that. So. I'm sure at some point, maybe, I'll sit back and watch, you know, the Matt Smith run, and the other guy, whose name eludes me. He's a Scottish fellow. He's been in a lot of stuff. I really like him. Sorry, guys. This is a ramble, and that also means that I'm trying to raid my memory banks, and they're not always spinning. At any rate, that's who my doctor is. The fifth Doctor. One of my favorite runs of him, well, they did the Five Doctor, I think it was called the Five Doctors miniseries or television movie Although technically it only had 4 because they couldn't get Tom Baker, so they got some archival footage, and while whoever was kidnapping all the doctors throughout history, he somehow got stuck in a time vortex, so we never actually see more of like just a couple of clips of him. But at any rate, that's who my doctor is, and it was fun to watch that thread on Twitter explode as people responded to it and then started putting their picks for different characters, different actors, whatever the case was, because there were a bunch of different franchises or things that I had never thought about or never hadn't heard of, because my finger is so far away from the pulse of modern entertainment that I'm lucky if I pick anything up. But it's a great thing about one of the great things about the internet is that you get to connect with a variety of people with a bunch of different ideas. You're not always going to be stuck in some sort of circle jerk echo chamber, and you get to pick your share, who you associate with it. And again, for me, the way I put it is, it's not who you like the most or what you like the most, it's what you feel. Who pops into your mind when somebody asks you about a particular character. But you can also branch it out, to entire franchises. Star Trek, for example. There's been quite a few different series, spread out over 60 plus years. For a lot of people, grew up watching the original series. I do remember growing up watching it in reruns. I wasn't around when it originally aired, but I do remember watching a lot of the reruns on television. But for me, when I think Star Trek, I go to Deep Space Nine. Deep Space Nine is my absolute favorite of the Star Trek franchises. I know I've rambled on about it before. I like the characters, I like the setting, I like the fact that it took a bunch of the different races that were sometimes jokes, like the Ferengi, and actually gave them some character. It actually gave them it made them interesting as opposed to some sort of bad storytelling idea. You see the meme, Star Trek: The Next Generation. Oh, look, it's a Ferengi episode. Star Trek: Deep Space Nine. Oh, look, it's a Ferengi episode. Not all of them were great, but in general, if it was a Ferengi-centric episode, at least it wasn't boring. Star Wars. Star Wars does mean a lot of different things for different people. For some, it's, space, dogfighting in space. It could be, good versus evil. It could be, the Jedi versus the Sith, depending upon the era. For me, the Rebellion era, from A New Hope through the destruction of the second Death Star in Return of the Jedi, that is the era that I associate most. But there are a lot of people that, didn't grow up on that, and the extended universe or Legends is theirs. My stepson, for him, it's the prequel trilogy, because that's what the Star Wars that he grew up with, and there's nothing wrong with that, because, he does appreciate all the others, but, Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi, when they're young and in their prime, Darth Maul, Count Dooku, all of those, and that's what, he associates with Star Wars, or at least that's the impression that I got when we talk about it. I don't know what he feels about the sequel trilogy, but, he watched the Clone Wars, he watched, I don't know, I'm pretty sure he also watched The Bad Batch, which is something that I need to sit down and watch, but, for a lot of people, possibly for a new generation, the sequel trilogy is going to be Star Wars for them because they didn't grow up on the old movies or TV shows, any of the older media, and that's their first introduction to Star Wars. There's nothing wrong with that, especially if they do go back and, watch the superior original trilogy. But I couldn't believe how much the thread exploded with people talking about it and just talking about their likes and, what they liked and what they disliked. And I don't remember any personal attacks or hateful comments or anything like that. It all was, just a big old geek thread, and I don't think I've ever captured that again. It was a lot of fun, and I might have to dig it up on Twitter and see if it's still there, archived. It's been a very long time. But it's fun to discuss, different people's ideas about, how they feel about, these different things. Going back to Star Wars, for a lot of people it might be, like the West End Games role-playing game. I have a lot of history with that. It's a lot of fun. Still wish I had my books, but a lot of them did have to get sold for the I'm moving to Texas fund, or I need some cash and never thought I'd play them again. One of my regrets, selling a lot of my gaming stuff, but it's water under the bridge. I'm hoping to start rebuilding something of a collection. I'm slowly doing it, but that's moving ahead. But now I really want to find Robin of Sherwood and watch it again, because I found like some bad YouTube copies of it. Like somebody recorded it from their TV with like a handheld camera. The classic old herky-jerky, like you used to catch bootlegs in movies of people smuggling in cameras and, hearing laugh tracks and stuff like that. But, yeah, let's see if I can find it. Robin Hood being one of those myths and legends that I really like. King Arthur, it's another one that's had, lots of different interpretations. Probably my favorite would be Nigel Terry in Excalibur. I thought, he portrayed the young Arthur very well. As naive, trying not to be a nuisance, trying to help until he pulled the sword from the stone and gave it to his brother. And, sure enough, Kay thought about, I pulled the sword from the stone. Oh, yeah. But I have a feeling he knew that at some point he'd be called on it, and then pretty sure he also realized, oh, crap, my squire, my brother, he's actually the King of England. But I really enjoyed Excalibur. I thought it was an exceptionally well-done movie. I'm not sure if I ever saw anything else of Boorman's, but I just liked the cast, especially a very young and hot Helen Mirren as Morgana Le Fay. We got to see a lot of different characters, a lot of different young actors. Patrick Stewart as, I think he played Leodegrance, and it's always funny watching, seeing the memes of, him in full plate mail armor, defending his daughter, whatever the case is, and then, like, Captain to the Bridge, making it look like, that performance was out of a, something that Picard would have done on the holodeck. But you got to see a very young Liam Neeson, and I think one of the better portrayals of the Arthurian legend, very bloody. One of the things I especially like about it is the Foley, the sounds, when, swords clang, or when, somebody hits armor, they went out of their way to make it really loud to give that impression of steel on steel. And that was, helped sell the idea that, you were actually looking at a battle in medieval England. At the same time, Graham Chapman as King Arthur in Monty Python and the Holy Grail also comes to mind, and swinging that pendulum of realism the exact opposite way. The entire cast of Monty Python playing multiple characters, and that's the other actor that I think of when I think of King Arthur. Graham Chapman as, King Arthur. If you've never seen Monty Python and the Holy Grail and you're easily offended, I wouldn't recommend watching it. Monty Python gives zero about who they offend, and sometimes I think they go out of their way to see exactly who they can offend. And what's funny about Monty Python is so many little things that have crept up into, modern pop culture. Magic the Gathering, there's a card, I think it's called Prodigal Son, and they've got somebody on it, and he kind of reminds me, the artwork kind of looked like the Enchanter played by John Cleese. And the card is often just nicknamed as Tim because, some people call me Tim. But Holy Grail is one of the most quotable movies, and that could be good or bad just on the grounds that, some people absolutely love it, some people hate it, and let's face it, if you've been playing a long-term D&D campaign, you might start off as King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table from Excalibur, but at some point you will devolve into Monty Python and the Holy Grail. That's all but guaranteed. Somebody is going to bring up the Caves of Arg, or the Holy Hand Grenade of Antioch, or any of the other gags. It's all but inevitable, and you can try to ban it from your game. You will fail miserably, but if your game master is trying to go for a more serious vibe, try to keep the Monty Python stuff in check, because nothing pisses a game master off when they're trying to set the stage, something dark, something gritty, and you start, mouthing off, man, she turned me into a newt. I got better. Things like that, just little things that can absolutely destroy the mood. But let's see what else. Wow, it is getting dark. I do like to think that, the different portrayals and all of that influences you, in some ways. Again, especially if you're younger, and some of those portrayals or those movies are very influential on your development. I keep saying, I lived in England when I was a young child. And, people will often comment, well, that explains quite a bit, because let's face it, to a lesser extent, Britain is not quite as sandbagged about a lot of things as America is. Benny Hill, for example, on public television in Great Britain, he might have a very attractive woman who loses her shirt. You might get to see a pair of breasts on television. That wouldn't fly in the United States, at least not on public television. And just the general humor is not... Well, British humor is, British humor. And a lot of people don't necessarily get it, especially if they're from the States, because it can be very subtle and very dry. However, speaking of Benny Hill, I watched a lot of Benny Hill. Again, probably explains a bit about, me. But when I was a kid, I didn't get a lot of the humor, a lot of the more subtle humor, political humor, things like that. I could get the visual sight gags, seeing the attractive women, especially when they're, meeting Benny Hill and the rest of the cast, the little old guy that always got pat on the head. I also liked, when they sped up the camera frames, and put in all the different sound effects. What can I say? I'm easily amused. But I didn't get, a lot of the more subtle humor that was definitely aimed at adults. Well, fast forward, I'm probably in my mid-20s. I'm staying at a friend's house. I had traveled up to go to a concert, or was helping, I might have been in his wedding. I don't remember. But he had Comedy Central. And I'm flipping through it. I couldn't go to sleep because it's very hard for me to sleep in a new environment. And I didn't have a bed. I had like a sleeping bag or something. So I flipped on Comedy Central, and sure enough, it was late at night. They had Benny Hill. I don't remember the setup, but I do remember watching the episode, and they got to the end, to the gag, and I laughed my ass off because I got the humor. Now, a lot of Americans probably won't get the humor because they didn't grow up in England at that point, but a lot of it clicked. I don't remember the show, but something I watched, later as an adult, or maybe it was a clip. This couple were talking, and come to find out, they liked rival football factions. And when I say football in the context of England, for the Yanks across the pond, that's soccer. But to the rest of the free world, soccer is football. Just contrary to popular belief, America is not the center of the world, no matter how much we want to pretend otherwise. At any rate, the setup was to come to find out after like 10 or 20 years of marriage, they liked rival football clubs. And if you don't know anything about, football in the rest of the world, they make American fans look like 7th graders. I remember when I lived across the pond, after a lot of big matches, stadiums getting destroyed by the winning team, not the losing team, as they would riot and loot and, just were general hooligans about it. But at any rate, now I would like to watch some Benny Hill as well. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug. And I think, companies know that, and that's why we get so many things harkening back to our childhood, to our youth, back to when, at least mentally, things were better. Most people might not have had a job. They didn't know about, the financial realities of the world. Politics was, something that, grown-ups talked about, unless you actually happen to be in the middle of something of it. But, yeah. Nostalgia is a hell of a drug, and I'm trying not to suckle on that particular teat, but sometimes it's hard. And let's face it, a lot of nostalgia it calms you. It's a comfort blanket, if you will. It's why people go back and watch the same movies, listen to the same music, TV shows, whatever the case is, because it's comforting. I do try to, watch new shows, but, I will go back and watch Deep Space Nine, or at least specific episodes, Babylon 5, different facets of Star Trek. I'll rewatch the original Star Wars trilogy periodically. I'm also one of those people that I didn't mind a lot of the work that Lucas put in to redo it. I would like Disney to actually be able to release the original cuts of the movie, however, because, that's what I grew up on. All the bad I say bad special effects. All the unfinished special effects, or the fact that, they were done in the 1970s and 80s, no CGI, that kind of thing. But what are your thoughts on your different selections for your characters? Who is your Doctor? Who's your James Bond? Who is your Robin Hood, your King Arthur? What is your favorite Star Trek? Go ahead and like and subscribe. Let me know in the comments below. I'm very curious, and I do find this a very interesting topic, as it does point, to where people, might have grown up and how they were exposed to a particular franchise. But looks like it's going to start raining again, so I'm going to put my phone up. But thanks for watching. Like and subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next video.